Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of the Gospel of Matthew, and we're in chapter 27, and we're in the middle of the account of the crucifixion, and I'm going to read verses 32 through 37. As they were coming out, they found a certain Cyrenian named Simon. This man they pressed into service to bear his cross. And when they had come to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull, they gave him wine to drink mingled with gall. And after having tasted it, he was unwilling to drink it. And when they crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves, and they cast lots. Sitting down, they began to keep watch over him there. And they put above his head the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Matthew doesn't go into quite the detail that some of the other gospel writers do in describing the actual events of the crucifixion on the cross, but he's the one who tells us about Simon of Cyrene. Cyrene is a city in North Africa. It was a fairly large city, and it had a large population of Jews in it. So he was there for Passover, and they pressed him into service to bear the cross. We usually think of the image of the cross being the cross itself, the cross. But that's probably not what Jesus was carrying. Strapped to his arms and shoulders would have been the cross piece. It would have been 6 by 6, 8 by 8, something in that, and maybe 6 feet across, 5, 6 feet across, and it was, or 6 feet across, I should say, or maybe even a little longer. And it would have been the piece to which he would have been tied or nailed, and of course he was going to be nailed to that piece. And he would have carried that to the place of crucifixion, and then this cross piece, they would have hauled up the scaffolding by ropes and put it in place, and that's how he would have been crucified. And so that's probably what's being described. So anyway, Jesus has been so injured by the beating that he's unable to carry the cross piece himself. And so they grab someone from the crowd. And this happens to be a man from Cyrene whose name is Simon, who is immortalized now in Scripture because he has been given this task. And he helps Jesus bear the cross piece to Golgotha, called the place of the skull. Golgotha is just Aramaic. That means the place of the skull. And it's unclear whether it was named that because crucifixions were taking place there, or whether it was named that because this hilltop resembled a human skull. But that was the name of the place. They gave him wine to drink mingled with gall. This would have been wine that was common wine, bitter wine, table wine, and it would have been laced with herbs and probably barbiturates that would have been a soporific. This in itself was perhaps an act of mercy, in that it would have deadened pain, deadened his sensations, and shortened his time on the cross. This he refuses because he has to keep his wits about him to fulfill all prophecy. We have in Matthew the reference to the wine mingled with gall from Psalm 69, which is interesting. And then we also have Psalm 62 mentioned in the next verse, which John also mentions in John 19, that the Roman soldiers are gambling for his clothing. They had the right to his clothes. Probably Jesus would have been, people who were crucified were generally crucified. They were stripped as an act of humiliation, and they were crucified naked. Nobody ever presents Jesus on the cross in this way, and I think we understand why. But there's every bit of the likelihood that was how he was. That's how he was crucified. John also tells us that his outer garment, his robe that his mother made in one piece, they didn't want to tear up, and so they cast lots for that. And they sat down and began to keep watch over him there. They didn't know how long they were going to be on the job. It could have been hours. It could have been, a couple of days that somebody was going to be on the cross. Probably not going to be a couple of days on this day because it is the Passover, and so they need to have these guys off the cross by sundown, and which is something that they do accomplish. So they know they've settled down to be there for a few hours, at least until about sundown. And it says they put a sign above his head. John tells us this is in Aramaic and in Latin and in Greek. And it was not uncommon to put a titulus, which is the name of the sign, that you put above a person's head when they were crucified, and it would give the charge against them, like murderer or robber, and it would say what they were convicted of being. But on Jesus' titulus, it says, Jesus, King of the Jews. And of course, we know that the Jews objected to this, and Pilate refused to change it. But in the very oldest depiction we have of Jesus on the cross, which is from a piece of graffiti from the Palatine Hill that dates from around the year 200, that's the way the cross is depicted. There's a T, and then a little offset from this perpendicular piece is a titulus, and it's offset, and it's not the way we usually depict the cross, but this is the oldest depiction that we have of Jesus on the cross. It's the Alexamenos graffiti, and it's from Rome. It's a piece of graffiti chiseled into a wall on the Palatine Hill, and that's exactly how Jesus is portrayed. Okay, we're going to pick up with verse 39 next time. The crowd is going to be quoting a song without realizing it, and it's going to prompt Jesus to say the thing that has troubled us for so long. Well, we'll pick up there next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.